and welcome back to the second part of our budget discussion. So Bob, 4.5 years ago, you came to the City of Corinth. And one of the things that you really challenged council on at the time was our perspective on the importance of operating outside of the four walls of City Hall and building our relationships with the other four cities, building our relationships with the county, with Lynn Stuckey, who's our representative in the state, and also our federal officials. So how, in this budget, do we plan on addressing further regional cooperation?
Well, this is an exciting part of what's going on. The one thing I'm real pleased about is, as a city manager, the four managers from the four cities meet on a monthly basis. You've had, 3 joint city council meetings with Shady Shores, Lake Dallas, and Hickory Creek. And I think that is really important in terms of what's going on. So let me hit transportation first, just quickly, is we're working with Shady Shores and Lake Dallas on improvements of Dobbs Road from Corinth Parkway to Shady Shores. And that will help with some of the traffic flow of the schools, and so that helps the three of us. We're also working with Shady Shores and with Denton County about improvements to Shady Shores Boulevard as it relates to Denton. And we're working with the county to include that in the county bond program that will be occurring in November. So those are important. But the one that I think is the most exciting is broadband. All four councils identified broadband as a critical issue within the Lake Cities. And we started that, a year and a half ago. From that initial plan, we had a committee between the four cities, and we began work on that. And what we found is that before you can make any plan or move forward on that, you kind of have to figure out what's going on here. So we contracted with Connected Nation, which is a national firm, but they do some significant work in Texas as well, to actually map or to look at what infrastructure we actually have here. And so that has been done. They've helped us complete a strategic plan, and all four cities have adopted that strategic plan on a unanimous vote. And so I think that speaks partly to the quality of the work that's gone on. So we're at that point now where we have the data, and what we're generally finding in the Lake Cities, and COVID really began to point this out, is you begin to look at the speeds and what you need when kids are at home for school work or people are working from home. You really need speeds in excess of 100 megabytes up and down. And so much of our area within Corinth is below 100. And Lake Dallas is a little less, Shady Shores is a little less. Hickory Creek's about where we are. So that's kind of how we're looking at the region. So we are now working to issue a request for proposals to find additional internet providers that will come in, and I think will be through a public-private partnership to be able to boost our speeds in excess of 100 megabytes up and down. We'll be using part of the American Rescue funds for that. It's a little tricky in that regard because the FCC definition of broadband is 25 megabytes up and 3 down, which is not hardly dial-up or DSL. So we're working on, we'll be using the American Rescue money to make a fiber link or fiber circle around the 4 Lake Cities, and then have a public-private partnership for doing the last mile or bringing that service to the home. That proposal is being developed currently. We're hoping to have that ready to be published in and actually requesting proposals by the end of October, so that sometime in the spring of 2022, we'll be able to lay out a plan for where we're going long term.
So, Bob, you and I have been a part of the technology committee, or the broadband committee, now since its inception, so a year and a half. Prior to that, it was council's concern about the broadband in Corinth in general. And what we found was, what we thought was that we could just call up Charter and say, hey, we need some faster speeds. But one of the things that I found interesting when we began the broadband study is the current providers in Corinth didn't want anything to do with helping us in the beginning. But it seemed as if, as we added the request for proposal and put together the strategic plan, that the buy-in from some of these companies has increased quite a bit.
I think their interest has grown because they see that we're serious about doing something, and so that helped. That's significant, actually. And what makes it difficult is whenever the infrastructure is put in a new subdivision, then it's the most current at the time. So if you have a subdivision that was built in 2000, then it had good elements to it. So we come back 20 years later, and it's not as good as what it would have been 20 years ago. So it's always a catch-up game. So whatever gets put in 2020, we're going to be happy with. But in 2040, folks are going to look back and go, well, this doesn't meet our needs. And so you don't know exactly how all that changes. So those companies already are getting a return on their investment. And so they're having to make real challenging strategic moves and decisions on the level of investment that they want to make. And every company is a little different. But I think just having the data in front of them is a significant part of that. Now, the other element that we're finding is, in some cases, the infrastructure out in the street is good, but when you go in, a resident may have more
An old router.
Or an old router will slow you down.
Maybe using slow Wi-Fi extenders.
That's right.
All of the above. Or they may be somebody like me who has 42 items connected to their Wi-Fi.
You have too many, and you only wanted to subscribe to that service at the very lowest level and not some of the medium or higher speeds. So when we talk about that weakness, sometimes it's the infrastructure, sometimes it's the practice of the home, and sometimes it's the service you actually subscribed.
So the infrastructure is being dealt with the RFP and the internet service providers. We're also putting together a training program to assist homeowners in being able to troubleshoot and set up their system properly.
That's right. And so we'll be doing that this fall or later in the fall. But one of the things that is exciting from my perspective is all four towns are working closely together. They're committed to seeing this improved and are willing to think outside the box, if you will. I hate that term, but to think about other ways about what's going on. And see, in that sense, that's the North Texas Innovation Alliance has been helping us. We've been working with the Information Technology Committee from the National League of Cities. We've been working with out of the governor's office with their broadband initiative. So we're getting a lot of feedback and a lot of guidance. But it's a multifaceted kind of a challenge. But I think fundamentally what we've done well was starting and trying to get a good map and a basis from which we can make good decisions going forward.
And Bob, you had mentioned 100 meg down and 100 meg up. That does not sound like our ultimate goal. We have tossed around gigabit connections, hopefully in Corinth or in the Lake Cities at some point. Do we have some sort of a time frame on when that might happen?
Well, I think that the 100 that I reference is the absolute minimum that you want to see. A lot of homes really need service in the 200 and 300 range and above. So you're right there. In most of the conversations we're having and the work that we're doing with Marketplace.City, who's helping us put the RFP together, we're probably looking at about 6 years before we get everything done within the lake cities. So this is, like everything else, is a long-term game, and you just can't snap your fingers and change what's already here.
So, Bob, this would not be a budget discussion without talking about tax rates. Now, the tax rate that was presented to council did drop over the previous year. And of course, we'll go into a lot more detail about that in a bit. But I'm more curious about what does our tax rate mean with the Senate Bill 2 that was passed 2 years ago?
Of course, Senate Bill 2 is a limit on how fast or how taxes can be raised without a voter approval. Right now it's at 3.5%. And anything above that would go to an election in November. The proposed tax bill to meet the budget that you had requested is recommended at 56.7 cents. So it's just over a penny lower than what it is today. And so I think it adequately provides for services within the community, and it does make some investment in terms of maintaining long-term assets. But that's the biggest challenge of Senate Bill 2 is that it does not really set up a mechanism to look at the ongoing cost of the depreciation of assets. And Corinth has assets in the neighborhood of $600 million. And those are going to wear out over time. And so I think as we go long term, that's going to be the challenge. Now, the council last year went back and adopted an asset management plan to help us to think about that as we're going forward. That's going to be an ongoing challenge. But Corinth, I think, is a little better position because we're a younger town. So I think making those kind of provisions now is far better than waiting 20 years from now and then being a little behind the eight ball.
So if Corinth doesn't take care of their assets, what is one thing that myself as a citizen would notice first off if a city's not taking care of their assets?
Well, obviously it's going to be in the streets. The quality of streets would go down, maybe sidewalks, maybe the condition of the playground equipment, and maybe a little bit with the water pressure and the way the water is delivered. As those assets age and they're not being maintained, the ability to deliver that's going to be harder to see. It's going to be more difficult to deliver. But the streets are the most visible element there.
So one of the things that I've liked in the past, especially over the last two budget seasons, is we've done a really good job at communicating what 56 cents or 56.5 cents means to the average resident of Corinth. So when we do like if I go home and look at my home value and do the math, I pay a lot more in taxes than just 56 cents per $1,000. So can you explain a little bit about what percentage of Corinth's tax rate is to the total tax bill of the average resident?
Yes. When we talk about a resident's tax bill, the tax bill I get at home, just
Right.
like on yours, has an element for the school and for the county and for the city. So that would leave us about a fourth, 25% of the total tax bill actually comes back to the city.
So $1 for every dollar in property tax that I pay, about a quarter goes to the city.
Yeah. So for $1.25. Yes, that's right.
So Bob, out of that, so for every dollar that I pay as a homeowner here in Corinth, about 25 cents of that dollar goes to the city for the services that we need. How much is public safety out of that 25 cents?
And that's always an interesting question, and not because the numbers aren't sometimes quite as straightforward. And let me just say it like this: is that a portion of police and fire is done through the sales tax, a quarter cent for police for the crime control district, and the voters this year approved a quarter cent sales tax for the fire district. So a half cent of your sales tax goes to help pay for police. The property tax component's about 43% of that, so just under half. The other part of the funding that goes to particularly the fire department, is through a contract. So the cities of Shady Shores, Lake Dallas, and Hickory Creek pay for part of that fire department, just like Shady Shores is part of the police department. But that leaves us, at the end of the day, about 43% of your property tax goes to police and fire.
So another item of concern for most residents, at least for myself, is water rates. So as we're presenting the budget, what do we foresee is going to happen with our water rates this year?
The recommendation in the budget is to have no changes in the water rate. So we'll continue the rate structure that we have in place today.
So water rates in general are very complicated, and of course I've learned this over the last 6 years. Do you foresee that we're going to do a podcast over water specifically?
I think it would be quite useful to do that, because we would want to talk about the philosophy on how rates are set. Is always an interesting viewpoint, because there's a wide variety of options that are there, and the challenges with water supply within Denton County. Corinth was one of a number of cities, about 25 cities, that created the Upper Trinity Regional Water District some 25 years ago. And that provides for a long-term water supply for this area. We just had the groundbreaking for Lake Ralph Hall up in Fannin County just a few weeks ago. That work is going on, and that's going to help us with water supplies out around 2030 and beyond. But there's some active discussions about water supply beyond 2040. And so we're looking in the Sulphur River Basin for water. You've got a lot of activity going on in Dallas with the pipelines being built south down to Palestine, all to try to get water to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We have a significant challenge ahead, and I think it would be a great podcast.
Now, not to ruin the future podcast, but we live right down the street from Lake Louisville. Why do we have a problem finding water if we're so close to Lake Louisville?
Well, anytime a lake is built, different organizations can buy those water rights. With respect to Lake Louisville, Louisville, Irving, and Dallas own all the water rights. So it's owned by them, so we can't just go there and take it. We have to buy water from one of those cities to be able to have water. In our case, we're buying a little bit from Irving and quite a bit of it from Dallas. But if you look at the way the water is priced, we're in the not too distant future, it's going to be more expensive to get water from Lake Louisville than it will be from Lake Ralph Hall, which is 60 miles away.
Well, it was a long car ride.
It was. and so, but those are the challenges, and water is a significant challenge to the entire Dallas-Fort Worth region. So
I'd like to thank everybody for joining in on our first ever Let's Talk Corinth podcast. and our special guest here, Bob Hart, our city manager. And a reminder, there are lots of opportunities for each and every one of us to provide input on our fiscal year 2022 budget, which includes the budget workshop starting September 16th, and also email your council person. Our emails are all up on the website. Again, my name's Scott Garber. Feel free to look us up.
Thank you for the chance to be here, and thank you for sharing this kind of information. I think it's important as we go forward as a community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.